Serious. What is your small town's dark secret story? Story 1. I don't know if it's considered a dark secret, but in the county I lived in when I was younger, we had a soldier perish under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was either baked, hammered, or was experiencing mental distress and raided a nursery, the plant kind. They claimed he was charged by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and trying to take him. In the last 911 call, he said everything was fine suddenly. Just 14 to 15 minutes later, he was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was run over 2 more times and then passed away. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he perished. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, and money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of them couldn't be made out, except one. And the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying, "Tell her." At the nursery, there was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no footprints that led back to the soldier, even though his phone and wallet were there in the building. A lot of people, his family included, think he was harmed by some of the local guys there after they got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call and was hit by a driver while trying to get help. And the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were somehow connected to the department. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged with running him over. I think only the first driver stopped, but it was discovered that one of the other drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search for Austin Magoo. I wouldn't be too surprised since there was a lot of shady stuff happening in small town police departments, including covering up violations that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. I am a little confused with the wallet and phone part, but man, that poor guy. I hope the family gets their answers soon. Story 2. About a decade ago, there was a crime spike here. It was really bad because one cartel tried to displace the other. And because we're a sleepy town across the border from the US, we're prime cartel real estate. However, when they weren't tearing each other up in the streets, they would take, interrogate, end, and dispose of their rivals until eventually one cartel managed to keep the town. One thing that baffled the authorities was their stealth. They came out of nowhere, struck their target, vanished into the shadows. That may be possible for a small unit or even a lone agent, but that's unheard of in a cartel. Federal investigations were made and no one was able to find the cartel's headquarters. It had to be big because they had weapons, vehicles, metal shops, dorms, kitchens, and disposal equipment. They looked everywhere, nearby ranches, warehouses, junkyards, nothing. Until they looked where no one thought to look. A few kilometers outside of here is a fully operational state prison that they were using as their headquarters. Everyone was in on it, from the inmates to the guards to the warden to the governor. People met their end there, were burned, and the ashes were thrown away in the nearby river. Since then, the prison operation has been shut down and the former governor is a wanted man by the Interpol. Just to clarify, this is not Juarez in the state of Chihuahua. Juarez has had its share of atrocities, but I've never lived there or know the specifics of its crime habits. While not the town mentioned, it's entirely possible for Juarez to have suffered crimes with the same modus operandi. The town I'm talking about is Piedras Negras in the state of Coahuila. It's a city of less than 200,000 people, across the border from Eagle Pass in Texas, another small town of 9 square miles situated between Laredo and Del Rio. Forensic authorities have combed the river, finding small bone fragments and testing their DNA. As of 2016, 9 have been identified. There is a dispute over the governor responsible. At that time, the governor of the state was Humberto Moreira. However, he resigned before finishing his term so he could run for another office, which he lost. Because he resigned, a provisional governor was assigned with the name of Jorge Torres. During this time, there was absolute media silence regarding the matter, either because of bureaucratic stonewalling, cartel threats, or government payoffs. However, a national magazine called Proceso wrote an article about the crimes being committed in the state, and Morero ordered all copies of the magazine removed from newsstands. When the problems in the state started to surface, they both left the country. Morero got a scholarship to study in Spain, of which no one was able to identify the source, and he also lived in a chalet that had a monthly rent higher than his salary as governor. Meanwhile, Torres fled to the U.S. Morera managed to transfer the blame for all the wrongdoings of his administration onto Torres. Morera was arrested by Interpol a few years ago and charged with money laundering. Incredible as it may seem, the Spanish authorities handed him over to Mexico, where he has lived as a free man, going so far as to create his own political party. No charges of any crime have ever been brought against him, and he maintains his claim of innocence. Since his return, he has never left the country. To mock his claim, one senator went so far as to invite him to the Super Bowl with all expenses paid. Morera, fearing the Interpol, passed on the invitation. The senator tweeted a picture of the empty seat. Meanwhile, Torres was caught in the U.S. and also faced charges for money laundering. He pleaded guilty. It's worth noting that Torres' testimony gives details as to the cartel's operations during Morera's administration, including the protection they received and the times, dates, and sums of bribes paid. The Mexican government never included these statements as part of their investigation. Story 3. 15 years ago, the local DA called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops, and he hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he had parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop, sans its hard drive, was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from it. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone whom he had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? The general consensus is that homicide is the least likely option. I mean, someone who had a grudge against him would have had to have been in just the right place, the right time, to come across him unless they had been surveilling him. There's been questions raised about his involvement in the squashing of criminal charges against Jerry Sandusky years before he was actually charged, and if it was related to his disappearance. I don't know too much about that part of the situation, but I don't think they ever found a possible link between the two. Interestingly, the DA's brother ended himself years before the DA went missing, and Ray, the DA, was convinced it wasn't really the case. Sometimes, I guess, life is just stranger than fiction. Story 4. A freshman with Asperger's syndrome was being mistreated by his family at home. He was a problem child and got into trouble on purpose, but no one went too hard on him because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community. But one day, just before holiday break in December, he got really sick, but his mom sent him to school anyway. And then she locked him out of the house. He decided to try and get into one of the empty houses down the street through the chimney. Now, this kid was the size of a second grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys tapered down thinner. Mom never answered her phone when the school reported him missing. She went on a whole day without reporting her kid missing. No one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what happened to him. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere, or maybe went to his sister's house. Nope, he was found stuck and had passed away in a chimney. The schools organized an entire week of counseling, and as such, they wore pink for a day and handed out little pink ribbons on pins for him, since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. And that's how our small town started in 2020. It hasn't gotten any better, as you can see. So weird that it's been a while now. Man, that's so tragic. That poor kid deserved a lot better than that. Story 5. A guy owned a bar across the street from his house where he lived with his wife, daughter, and young granddaughter. He had a contractor working on the house. Grandma, who took care of the child during the day, thought it would be no big deal to leave the child sleeping while she went quickly to the market. The next thing that happened was that Grandpa saw the contractor running to his car and leaving the house. Curious, he went home to find out what happened, only to find his granddaughter crying. After the grandmother came back, he left the child with her, went back to the bar, got his weapon, and threw the keys to one of his regulars, asking him to close the bar because he had to end someone. When he arrived at the contractor's home, he wasn't there. He then spent the next 2 weeks surveying his home 24/7. When the perpetrator probably thought the coast was clear, he returned home. Grandpa saw him, broke the door, ended the guy in front of his parents, and left. He went directly to the precinct where he surrendered his weapon and made a full confession detailing everything. He was tried for premeditated. The prosecution had all the evidence and testimonies from his friends and parents of the perpetrator. They also presented the weapon and his confession. It's an open and closed shut case. The jury voted 7-0 not guilty. In Brazil, there are 7 jurors and you only need a majority to convict, not unanimous like in the US. Story 6. About 30 years ago, a local girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days, they found a suspect who was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific act. He apparently punished and ended the little girl. He was the kid's next-door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years, he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents, right next door. Laws were a bit different then, to the family of the girl and former friend. About a week later, the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report, and rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them, they'll just say that they're sure that he won't be coming back. Man, that story is crazy. And I got a lot more crazy small town stories in store for you, so please do hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more. Story 7. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs, and no one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses where people were squatting in, and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner every night. We didn't know who was homeless, we just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids, kept their fireplace going with trees we chopped down, gathered water by the well, traded, farmed, and trapped for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids, and we had the most robust school breakfast program I've ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was ashamed if they had dropped out at grade 10, and we all knew that if they needed the job, they should take it. Looking back, I realize how wild it is. Our town was just so poor, and no one was treated any different by me, or mine at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school. And there were no panhandlers, no beggars, nothing like that. I was just told the bussies were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No, I kind of think they were a-holes, but never did I make them feel uncomfortable, and most just ate, had some tea, left. This was in Newfoundland, Canada, by the way. Story 8. I think I was a senior in high school when this happened, but it was in our local paper every day for a long time. The details are hazy, but I'll do my best to recount them. 4 athletic male students, a female sophomore student. One male had access to the keys to the room because his parents worked for the administration. They apparently picked her up to get food and then went to the school locker room. 2 of them pressured her to participate in an act she did not want to and thought she was in physical danger had she not done anything. The female student 100% went to court, and then they completely turned it around on her, saying that she asked for it, that it was her fault, etc. They said if she really did not want to comply, she would have fought harder or her clothes would have been torn or messed up. She just left that school and moved instead of staying. I don't believe much happened to the male students at all. As for the male students, no one had to register for anything. No one went to jail. Their futures were all intact. I think 2 had to do service hours and probation, but that was it. Story 9. We had a crazy rich guy from the 1600s, 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so he decided that when he passed away, he would be laid to rest on the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be gone for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dental clinic now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. Story 10. We have a vineyard hill next to our village, and on that hill there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk, or walk their dogs, but almost nobody knows why the cross is there. During the war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited and the man was left alone. When the war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But the vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his weapon and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and ended himself too. From that day on, no one worked in the vineyards and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now you can't even recognize that there's a grave. For those who were curious, this happened in the northern part of Czechia, the Czech Republic. Oh man, I could understand the grief and the regret that the dad probably felt for sure. May their souls rest in peace. Story 11. A girl I went to high school with just vanished one day. From day one, everyone was telling the police that her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it. She already had a restraining order because he held a bladed weapon to her throat and threatened to take and end her, but with no evidence, they couldn't do anything. Over the years, several people went to the police saying that he had admitted to ending her, but they did nothing still. He eventually got in trouble for threatening to end another girlfriend and went to prison for 3 years. After prison, he came back to town and eventually asked another ex of his for a ride home from a party, and then she went missing after that night. They found her car burned and they arrested him again, and he had burns on his hands. A few months later, someone found a set of remains outside of town, and during the recovery, they found another set of much older remains. He ended them both, and the failure of our local police department caused a second girl to perish. Story 12. A well-known and well-loved public service figure was shot by his stepson. His young daughter saw the entire thing, and one had to reach into their father's pocket to get a phone and call 911. The stepson was arrested and has been in jail for over 20 years. Not sure of exact numbers, though. One of the girls recently started a petition to free her stepbrother from prison. She claims he was acting in self-defense. Their father had been violating all of them for years, and the stepbrother took the fall to keep his stepsisters safe. Her post about it was so shocking. We all thought that he had been slain over money or something, but she revealed so much. She said that he'd cycle through all of the kids. They dreaded hearing their father's footsteps outside their door because they knew it was their turn that night. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but it's horrific. Her recollection and plea to free her stepbrother went into so much detail. Story 13. A friend announced he was going to run for mayor at the town he lived in. The town was probably around 4,000 people or a little more, but it was a sister city to a town across the river from it that was probably 70,000 people, so the mayor actually had a little bit of power. A couple of days after he announced his run, he noticed the cops would drive by his place every hour or so, and they would stop and run the plates of every person that visited his house. They would then later pull those people over and give them a warning about a minor infraction. I was pulled over 5 times in 2 weeks because I didn't fully stop at that stop sign. Then flyers started getting put up about how my friend was trying to win the election and steal a bunch of money from the city, that he was super corrupt, and so on. Their basis was that over 20 years before this election, there was a flood in the town, and of course, there was a bunch of relief money that went into the town's bank account. A loan was given to a local business group that owned a little strip of restaurants along the river. The loan was interest-free for 15 years, and at the 15-year mark, some shady stuff started popping up. The people who got the loan said they paid it back, but the town only had records of a small amount being paid back. Then the state says that they were never paid back anything for the loan to the city, not even the amount the city said the loan recipient paid. So it becomes a huge ongoing story about corruption, misappropriated funds, missing money, and so on. Why is it relevant to my friend's election? Well, his cousin's wife's sister worked in the city's office accounting department. They basically said they had been working together to steal a bunch of money. Eventually, he dropped out because he didn't want to deal with it. Poof, no more corruption accusations and no more cops. Story 14. A bunch of teachers and administrators from my high school went to a conference over the summer. Apparently, on the way there, they came up with whatever happens at conference stays at conference. A bunch of them slept together, but I guess it got out of hand and some of the people who didn't want to participate in the fun started to get pestered. One particularly good-looking female teacher who didn't want to participate had reported the pestering to the school principal. He did nothing about it. That night, several male teachers and the school dean forced her into a hotel room and violated her. A lot of teachers and administrators did not return to school in the fall. The teachers got off with the charge because it was her word against theirs, and they all claimed she consented, and then, when the regret set in, she started to claim she was violated. It was really sad. She kept teaching, but was a different person after. She was always very happy and an energetic type of teacher, but after the incident, all her joy was just gone. Story 15. There was a serial perpetrator in my hometown who was never caught in the 1970s. We always believed it was one of our neighbors who was extremely creepy and met the age timeline, but there was no confirmation. The neighbor kept wolves on leashes he had purchased and bred so nobody could come near his house. He always gave my dad the creeps, and he came and snuck in our yard and tried to talk to me and my kid sister when we were playing outside, and my dad had to run him out of our yard at gunpoint. Well, the man passed away without ever being convicted, but he passed on to his son a sick obsession with John Wayne Gacy, and his son ended up ending his mother. He is still in prison, and we still believe his father was that slayer from the 70s, especially since he passed that on to his son, who became a slayer obsessed with serial perpetrators. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy what's the darkest thing that happened in your town that no one talks about. Story 5 is so shocking. I'll see you in that video, and thanks for watching.